Hey, is this thing recording? Is it recording? Yeah, it's recording.
Stand up.
Hello. Happy Wednesday. It's hump day, the middle of the week, if you're listening on Wednesday. If you're listening another day, a lot of times people will say, I'm just getting caught up on the podcast. I mean, how dare you? How dare you not listen to it each and every day first thing? Those of you who do, I cherish you most. You are the greatest. So many great friends, by the way, that I've made through this podcast. Just yesterday, off the top of my head, I got a package in the mail from Vicky, sent me seeds for my garden, which is in a very nice note, very thoughtful. I got a nice text. I had a great conversation with Addison, who's a regular listener and subscriber. And then also heard from Phil Round out in Wyoming, who's a talented musician, and he sent me a horrible picture of a cat's foot. Because yesterday on the news dump, listener subscriber Pete Coe said did the news dump about a coyote eating a cat. And so Phil said it's true. It happens. It happened to my cat. And he sent me a picture of his cat's paw. It's horrific, Phil. And also a little bit funny if it wasn't so horrific. But great people. So many great friends. Always great to hear from you. And I love you guys. Thank you very much for your support and your kind words. Love doing the podcast every day here for you, learning along with you. Two awesome guests joining me today, both experts in their fields, and both joining me for the first time. Love having new guests on the program. Naureen Fink is a counter-terrorism expert. She's at my friend Ali Soufan's outfit, the Soufan Group, where she's now the new executive director, and we talked about the threat of domestic terrorism and how it's evolved. Awesome conversation with her. I learned a lot. And then, for the first time ever, Matthew Cortland joined me, and he's an activist and a policy expert, specifically on the issues of healthcare and disability. He himself is disabled, and we had an awesome conversation as well. Also, both guests today, 10 out of 10 for their audio. You know, I'm always a little frustrated when the guest doesn't already have the very best audio ever. I mean, you're coming on a podcast. You should at least be using iPhone headphones. At least, right? You can't just be yelling at your laptop. But I try to get the best audio I can, have them record their side, and then I often put it on top of my audio and marry the two together. But today, both guests nail it. Love it. Great communicators, both of them as well. I very much enjoyed the conversations I had with both guests, and I'm sure that you will as well. How many of you listen to both guests? My dad was telling me I don't need to put two guests on every show. He said, you do too much. Yeah, I mean, who can listen to all that? I don't know. Dad, some people are in their cars for hours every day, Pop, and they listen to it. And I like to give people a choice, because maybe, for example, today I've got healthcare and disability with Matthew Cortland, and I've also got counterterrorism with Naureen Fink. Maybe you're not interested in one of those issues. I like to do my best to make you interested in all of the issues. The best compliment I've gotten from people like my friend Therese saying, I didn't think I was going to like that guest or be interested in a conversation about that subject, but somehow you did it. That's the best compliment. So I try to do it every day, try to trick you into caring about these issues that I certainly care a lot about and think a lot about and am very curious and passionate about. So let's get to the show, shall we? Let's do the news. It is Wednesday. It is the end of April. The President of the United States is going to speak tonight. If you're listening on Wednesday, he's going to give a speech to a joint session of Congress. So I say, let's look back at the last 24 hours in news. Here we go. Okay, like I said, President Biden speaking tonight. That's a big story, but I can't say anything about it because it hasn't happened yet. But it's going to be some pretty big announcements, I think, about how he sees the $2 trillion infrastructure proposal and talks about it and sells it. It's, by the way, already very popular. The polling, 68% support President Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure support. I mean, of course they do. Everybody's going to win. Your company, your big contracting company, you're a big Republican and you want to pay lower taxes, but you're about to get a huge contract from the government, maybe a multi-year contract. You're psyched about it. Everybody's psyched about it. Who wouldn't be? Why aren't you? Stop it. Stop being concerned. I hear my dad again. It's a lot of money. I spent a lot of. Who cares, Pop? 68% support the $2 trillion infrastructure proposal. We'll hear more about it tonight. All right, here's what's going on with COVID. Horrible in India. All kinds of nightmare stories coming out of that country. India reported more than 300,000 new confirmed COVID-19 cases for the sixth day in a row. India's 323,144 new infections over the past 24 hours comprises 39% of global cases. The CDC announced yesterday that it is now safe for vaccinated people to unmask outdoors. I will now present to you 2.5 minutes of her statement, which was longer, but I think these are the most 2.5 relevant minutes from CDC Director Rochelle Walensky.
There are many situations where fully vaccinated people do not need to wear a mask, particularly if they are outdoors, as shown by the graphic on the right. If you are fully vaccinated and want to attend a small outdoor gathering with people who are vaccinated and unvaccinated, or dine at an outdoor restaurant with friends from multiple households, the science shows if you are vaccinated, you can do so safely, unmasked. On the CDC website, we have posted examples of numerous outdoor activities that are safe to do without a mask if you are fully vaccinated. Generally, for vaccinated people, outdoor activities without a mask are safe. However, we continue to recommend masking in crowded outdoor settings and venues, such as packed stadiums and concerts, where there is decreased ability to maintain physical distance and where many unvaccinated people may also be present. We will continue to recommend this until widespread vaccination is achieved. Now let's talk about what you can do indoors. Here again, we have unvaccinated people and their risk on the left, where nothing has changed. Risk is indicated and masking is required. We then show the markedly decreased risk for vaccinated people on the right. Given what we know about COVID-19 vaccines and their efficacy, it is also safe for those who are fully vaccinated to return to the activities they love doing inside while wearing a mask. The guiding principles we released today and the illustrative examples compare the safety of several activities if you are vaccinated or not, and the difference is clear. As we gather more and more data on the real-world efficacy of vaccines, we know that masked, fully vaccinated people can safely attend worship services inside, go to an indoor restaurant or bar, and even participate in an indoor exercise class. Although these vaccines are extremely effective, we know that the virus spreads very well indoors. Until more people are vaccinated, and while we still have more than 50,000 cases a day, mask use indoors will provide extra protection.
And to demonstrate that, right on message, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, came outside and took his mask off and then took a couple of questions from reporters, one of which was, I think, a wasted question, and he got beaten up pretty hard for it. NBC News' Peter Alexander asked Joe Biden this, and sounds more like Joe Cool with this cool answer.
You chose to wear a mask, sir. You chose to wear a mask. You chose to wear a mask as you walked out here. What message were you sending by wearing a mask outside alone?
By watching me take it off and not put it back on till I get inside.
Do you have any preconditions?
How cool did he sound? He had his aviator glasses on and everything. He loved taking that mask off. What message is he sending? I mean, first of all, the fact that he didn't call Peter Alexander a terrible reporter and insult him over and over the way Donald Trump did any reporter whose question he didn't even barely like. He sent a message about personal responsibility, Joe Biden, in the middle of a pandemic or hopefully at the end. A message about wearing a mask, that if you're inside, it's cool, but then when you come outside, you can take the mask off if you're standing alone especially. So really not a big deal there. I'm not sure why that was necessarily a question you'd want to waste on the President of the United States there. But yeah, messaging, it's important. Role modeling, that's important too. You know, Joe Rogan also was trending yesterday. Comedian and podcaster Joe Rogan said on his podcast this.
And people say, do you think it's safe to get vaccinated? I've said, yeah, I think for the most part it's safe to get vaccinated. I do. But if you're like 21 years old and you say to me, should I get vaccinated? I go, no. Yeah. Are you healthy? Are you a healthy person? Like, look, don't do anything stupid, but you should take care of yourself. You should, if you're a healthy person and you're exercising all the time and you're young and you're eating well, and like, I don't think you need to worry about this.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you.
But there's a lot of jobs that will tell you need to have this.
Well, that's what's starting to happen now.
People are worried about them doing it for their children. And we talked about this earlier. Yeah. There's that you might have to have your children vaccinated. And, you know, I can tell you as someone who's both my children got the virus, it was nothing. I mean, I hate to say that. If someone's children died from this, I'm very sorry that happened. I'm not in any way diminishing that, but I'm saying the personal experience that my children had with COVID was nothing. One of the kids had a headache. The other one didn't feel good for a couple days. Yeah. Like maybe, I mean, not feel good. Like no big deal. No coughing, right. no achy, no like in agony. There was none of that. It was very mild. It was akin to them getting a cold.
Oh no, Joe, no. Bad. That's very bad. Then Tucker Carlson went on last night and echoed the same sentiment. I'll spare you from these two guys. If you're getting your health advice from a comedian or a podcaster, both of which I am, then you're doing it wrong. Life, that is. There are experts. Ask them questions. I do that daily right here every day. And so if you have questions for the experts and you don't have access, tell me to. I have access. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. What do you want to know? I'll reach out to them. I mean, speaking of experts, say we've got to get to herd immunity. Our country, our society, the planet needs to get to a critical mass of 70 to 90% of people vaccinated, first and foremost. I think the best point I saw made about this was from Will Aremis, who tweeted, do people like Joe Rogan, who frame masking and vaccines as individual health choices, really not understand that they're as much about protecting others as protecting yourself? Or are they just pretending not to understand it because it's easier than admitting that they just don't care about other people? I loved that point. I thought that was a really very good point. But yeah, dangerous stuff from Joe, who is the most popular podcast in the country. Ethan Klein tweets, healthy young people definitely should get the vaccine. That's how we stop the spread. Not rocket science, guys. It's about returning to normal and saving lives. In India, they're literally burning bodies in the street while people like Joe Rogan are encouraging young people not to get vaccinated. So just a few takes on that, and you can use those arguments yourself as well. And if you really want to learn from the experts, tell your friends to come over to this podcast, because I have usually two of them on every single day. All right, so my favorite TV journalist, probably Chris Hayes. I really like his work a lot. I mean, Ali Velsh's show, I think, is the best show. But I just, the kind of questions and thinking that Chris Hayes has always done, and I like it. I like the guy. And he had Anthony Fauci on last night, Dr. Fauci, and he have been talking. Chris is a basketball player. He likes playing pickup basketball, and so does Anthony Fauci. And they're both from New York City, grew up in New York City. And so I've watched the show pretty regularly, a couple times a week. I check in on it. And often when Chris Hayes is talking to Dr. Fauci, he uses this threshold of when can we play indoor pickup basketball? Anyway, he brought it up again last night. I thought this was a great exchange and a lot of fun. And you get to hear Dr. Fauci just finally dunk on Chris Hayes. Good stuff.
You and I have talked about a timeline before, specifically around the thing that I missed probably the most of pre-COVID life, which is playing pickup basketball indoors with people. And we talked about the safety of that. You had at one point said, look, we're looking at winter of 2021, sometime in that November, December range, that, you and I can maybe play a little pickup, or, I could play pickup. I don't know. Depends if you're still game. Point being, are we closer now given the rate that we've been vaccinating at. It seems to me like that was we've vaccinated our way, that seems more possible sooner than it was when I talked to you maybe 6 months ago.
Absolutely. Again, Chris, it gets back to the situation of why it's so important for as many people as quickly as possible to get vaccinated, because the more people that get vaccinated, the lower level. Right now, given the guidelines that the CDC came out, they clarified that if you're vaccinated and I'm vaccinated, we can play a pickup game tomorrow. I'll probably destroy you, but that's okay. But we could play a pickup game tomorrow.
Famous Regis point guard. Famous Regis point guard, Anthony Fauci, talking that trash, as I'm sure he did back on the mean streets of Brooklyn, the gyms of Regis High School.
I thought that was a fun moment. I thought that was a good moment. We need those types of real human interaction moments and jokes, and great to see both of them talking and seeming just a little bit lighter after so much horror. And finally, back where we started with President Joe Biden, just making some comments on the progress we've made and the road ahead when it comes to the pandemic, COVID-19.
Next week, I'll be laying out the path ahead to continue our fight against COVID-19 to get us to July 4th. This is our target date to get life in America closer to normal and begin to celebrate our independence from the virus together with our friends and our loved ones as we celebrate Independence Day. But before that, I wanted to speak briefly to all of you today about the recent change announced by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. Let me say first, while we still have a long way to go in this fight and a lot of work to do in May and June to get us to July 4th, we've made stunning progress because of all of you, the American people.
Also didn't see too many headlines about this, but yesterday President Biden signed an executive order to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour for all federal workers, providing a huge bump to hundreds of thousands of workers. The Biden administration said the higher wages would lead to greater worker productivity, offsetting any additional costs to taxpayers. And that's the president of the United States. He's a politician making you a promise. But the economic analysis is, according to the Economic Policy Institute, that as many as 390,000 low-wage federal contractors would receive a raise, with roughly half of the beneficiaries being black or Hispanic workers. There are an estimated 5 million contract workers in the federal government, according to a posting last year by the Brookings Institution. So that's really good news. I think that went undercovered, so I wanted to mention it. One story that didn't go undercovered is the story about the head of the NRA killing an African elephant back in 2013. He and his wife were in Botswana. It's Wayne LaPierre and his wife, Susan. And they killed 2 elephants. And the New Yorker magazine got actual copies of the footage. They filmed it. It was filmed with the intention of apparently promoting the organization's reputation among hunters. The 10-minute video shows Wayne LaPierre shooting an African savanna elephant 3 times, but failing to kill it as he repeatedly shot it in the wrong place at point-blank range. Somebody else finally finished the job for him, and you hear LaPierre say, "He went down, so that's all that counts." Later that day, his wife, Susan LaPierre, successfully made her kill, and I accidentally watched that part of it and was absolutely horrified by it. And I badly now want both Susan and Wayne LaPierre to be trampled by elephants. And then while they're still barely breathing, I want them to be eaten. And then I want the elephant to rip their arms off and hold them in the air like Susan LaPierre did when she held the elephant tail in the air after cutting it, saying, "That's my elephant tail. Way cool. Victory." Oh, my Lord. Man alive, that is horrible. I wonder if there are any like really crazy gun nut folks that are big NRA members or maybe even hunters that see that and say, you know, I can't. That's too much. That's horrible. Maybe not. I mean, remember, there was a similar photographs of stupid Eric and Don Jr. holding up like animal parts. I think it was an elephant too. I forget. I don't even want to think about it. But the reaction to this yesterday on social media was, as you can imagine, crazy. I really like Jill Filipovich's tweet. She said, firing from point-blank range, LaPierre shot the animal 3 times in the wrong place. Finally, a guide had the host of Under Wild Skies fire the shot that killed the elephant. And she writes, extremely revealing of a broadly sociopathic culture that the scandal here is Wayne LaPierre is a bad shot, not Wayne LaPierre paid thousands of dollars to go on vacation in order to murder one of the planet's most intelligent and awe-inspiring beings, just for kicks. Adam Serwer on Twitter says, everything in this story is deeply pathetic and sad, but the NRA's most bankable fantasy is not shooting defenseless animals, but the human caricatures that populate the Fox News cinematic universe. Just a couple of the, hundreds of thousands, probably millions of reactions to that awful, awful news. We'll see what happens next with Wayne LaPierre and the NRA. Man, I'm hoping that what happens next is that he gets run down by a wild bull. I say Pete Coe has to write a jingle about an elephant actually killing Wayne LaPierre. What do you say, Pete? I like what Adam Serwer said, what he called the Fox News cinematic universe, because yesterday in right-wing media, it was that Joe Biden is going to take away your meat, your hamburgers. And, of course, that never happened. It was never said. But that didn't stop a whole bunch of prominent Republican politicians and commentators from repeating that lie over and over and over again. And yesterday, it was about Kamala Harris's children's book being handed out to undocumented minors who are being welcomed to the United States, which is like, who comes up with this shit? I'll tell you who. The New York Post. Yeah, listen to this from the Washington Post, Paul Farhi, about the story. He writes, a longtime New York Post reporter said she has resigned after being ordered to write a false story that claimed undocumented minors were being welcomed to the United States with copies of a children's book written by Vice President Kamala Harris. Quote, the Kamala Harris story, an incorrect story I was ordered to write, in which I failed to push back hard enough against, was my breaking point. Laura Italiano is the name of that New York Post writer. She tweeted about it yesterday. You know what she didn't do? Apologize to Kamala Harris. She's written for the Post since the 1990s, apparently. But this was a story that made it around the world very quickly, including right into the White House itself. And President Biden's spokeswoman, Jen Psaki, actually had to take a question about the story, which she had no idea about because it's so false and untrue. Here's Fox News' Steve Doocy's son, Peter.
Last couple of days in the New York Post that every migrant child being brought to a shelter is being given a copy of her children's book, Superheroes Are Everywhere. Do you know why that is and if she is making any money off of that?
Of the president, of the vice president?
President's book, yeah.
I'd have to check with our Health and Human Services team if they're talking about if they go to shelters or if they go to...
Yeah, in the welcome kit, apparently, there's a copy of her 2019 children's book, Superheroes Are Everywhere.
I'd have to certainly check on that. Here, it's a good book.
And then I've got one more.
No, thank you. I mean, that was awful. Awful that happened. And awful how it's been repeated by so many people, and it'll just be taken as fact by a huge percentage of Americans who hear their leaders talking about it. Conservative lawmakers and GOP party officials, according to Washington Post, also made hay out of the children's book story in the 4 days it remained online and uncorrected. First, Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas and Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio blasted the story. Republican National Committee Chair Ronna McDaniel tweeted, after learning officials are handing out Kamala Harris's book to migrants at facilities at the border, it's worth asking, was Harris paid for these books? Is she profiting from Biden's border crisis? Yikes. Of course, the Washington Post is smart to point out that Ron McDaniel's tweet is somewhat ironic. The Washington Post reported this month that the RNC used more than $400,000 in donated funds last year to buy copies of books written by Republican authors, potentially generating royalty payments. See, it's their scheme. It's not a conservative scheme. I mean, I think all authors are probably willing to do that, or at least most. But nonetheless, the irony is rich. Great reporting by the Washington Post and so many others on this story. And fascinating that the woman was forced to write this lie. It was a front page story in the New York Post, and she resigned over it. So that is an important story for a number of reasons that we should probably discuss with other journalists and media critics. And finally, before I dump all the rest of the news on you, I do want to mention the FBI announced yesterday that it had opened a civil rights investigation into the death of Andrew Brown Jr., who was a black man that was fatally shot by police in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Earlier on yesterday, attorneys of his family released an independent autopsy report which showed that Brown was shot 5 times, including a shot in the back of his head. Calls are growing for the police to release the full body cam footage. A 20-second clip, which was supplied to the family, has been put out, but they were fired up yesterday in North Carolina. Here's my friend Bakari Sellers.
You know, I say often that only in this country can you have the trial of Derek Chauvin be interrupted by the death of Dante Wright, be interrupted by the death of Adam Toledo, be interrupted by the death of Ma'Khia Bryant, and now we find ourselves here in Elizabeth City. And so I'm tired.
Bakari on Twitter says that body camera footage should be released within 48 hours where a police shooting is involved, unless law enforcement prosecution shows just cause for the delay. The burden being placed on families and media to overcome our standard is absurd. Be closely following that story and all of the rest of them as well, talking to experts about them anytime I can here on Stand Up, and let me know who you think I should be talking to. Always, I get so many great ideas from the folks who listen to this show. I consider you all producers, bookers, creative ideas people. So email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. All right, that's the last 24, and here's everything else I've got for you, rapid fire style, in the news dump.
Ravens in the parking lot pecking at some clumps. It's myriad types of roadkill on today's news dump.
Yeah, Pete called another news dump jingle. Actually, that was an old one that was reused because Pete is telling me that his computer is in the shop. Whatever you say, Pete. Hunter Biden's on a motherfucker. Okay, here is your news dump. Let's start in, I guess, technically it would be in Arizona, where the annual Counter-Culture Festival, Burning Man, has been canceled. Burning Man canceled the 2021 festival in the northern Nevada desert for the second year in a row because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I guess you're just going to have to burn your own man, have a little smaller Burning Man festival somewhere on your own. ABC News reporting that a U.S. warship has fired warning shots at small boats, Iranian boats, the second time this month. Iranian craft swarmed U.S. ships in the Persian Gulf. An earlier incident on April 2nd marked the first time in more than a year that Iranian vessels had harassed American ships in the area. At least that's how it's being reported. 3 Iranian speedboats, small speedboats, came 70 yards of a Coast Guard cutter operating in international waters in the Persian Gulf. Imagine being given that order. You're like some kind of Iranian speedboat chief, and they're like, "Hey, Mahmoud, I need you to go out there to get as close as you can to those American warships as possible." Yeah, come on, boss. I don't want to do that. I really don't want to hit that bee's nest very badly. I mean, they got guns on the. Get out there or we'll hang your family. Death to America. All right, boss. By the way, it is weird. I mean, it is their neighborhood. That'd be like them having warships in the Gulf of Mexico and us running up on them in speedboats. Seems wrong, right? All right, I like this story. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Authority, is that what it stands for? Anyway, they're going to be fining disruptive air passengers up to $31,000. What? Federal officials keep seeing cases of airline passengers getting into confrontations with flight attendants and other passengers, and they have had it. They are saying now that yesterday the FAA announced it's going to seek fines up to $31,750 for 3 more passengers who allegedly disrupted flights by disobeying or interfering with flight attendants. Each of the latest incidents apparently involved alcohol. That's why the flight attendants, the pilots, and obviously the TSA, they don't care if you got a little weed on you. That's what calms you down. The alcohol is what makes people really upset. Jesus. January 4th, the JetBlue Airway flight from Haiti to Boston, a man drank alcohol that he had brought on board. Then he began yelling and grabbed the arms of 2 flight attendants. The crew moved nearby passengers to other seats, called the police to meet the plane when it landed. and the FAA proposed a $31,000 fine against the man. That seems high. I want to read more into that. Ever tell you about the time I saved a plane on the way from Palermo, Sicily to New York? If I haven't, remind me, and I'll tell you about my hero story. Okay, so moving on. Elon Musk, who is a huge asshole, and apparently Jeff Bezos is also an asshole. Anyway, these two assholes are two of the richest guys in the world, and they are busting each other's balls on Twitter. Apparently, Elon Musk is teasing Jeff Bezos, says he can't get it up in a battle over the space contract. because NASA tapped Elon Musk's company, SpaceX, to build the craft intended to transport U.S. astronauts to the lunar surface, and not the Jeff Bezos space company, Blue Origin. Anyway, I mean, what is he, 6? Elon Musk is a huge asshole. Just to be clear, I want a Tesla, and I know that supports him. I mean, his products are great. They're not his products. Other people designed them. He is just a grifter. What a dick. I mean, I hate to be defending Jeff Bezos. I'm not, but it's just so ridiculous. Can't get it up. Or is it, maybe it's funny. Maybe you think it's funny because can't get up to orbit. LOL, he wrote. Anyway, moving on from that stupid story. Billionaire ball busting. Oh, I just read this story. A bill to kill up to 90% of Idaho's wolves is heading to the governor. Lawmakers voted 58-11 to send the agriculture industry-backed bill, Republican Governor Brad Little, the Idaho House, yesterday approving this legislation to allow the state to hire private contractors and expand methods to kill wolves roaming Idaho, a measure that could cut the wolf population by 90%. Apparently, cattle and sheep ranchers are pissed because the wolves would cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars by killing animals or harassing them, causing them to lose weight, making them less valuable when they're sold. But opponents said the legislation threatens a 2002 wolf management plan involving the federal government that could ultimately lead to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service taking back control of managing the state's wolves. Environmental groups blasted the House's approval in Idaho of this measure. They called on Republican Governor Brad Little to veto the legislation. The Western Watersheds Project says the bill will waste millions of dollars of public funds on killing wolves and threatens to ultimately return the species to the endangered species list and federal management. Oh, man. I'll have to talk to my friends at Fish and Wildlife about this one. All right, hurry. I need some good news. Let me head over to the USA Today Humankind section, where there's some happy news always in that section. A doctor-enabled man to see again after 19 years. A paralyzed toddler has learned to walk again. Students raised money for a teacher living in their car, and kids cheered in the cafeteria when the cafeteria manager became a U.S. citizen. So those are good stories. Most stories are good. Most people are good. Most interactions are good. It's the bad and sad and negative ones that we notice, which is why we talk about them more, because they're rare or not as common. All right, that's my mantra I like to say to myself to keep myself able to do this job each and every day, knowing everything that's happening in the world can be a little angst-producing. So I always remind myself that lesson. Okay, let me get to my guests on today's program. I have two excellent guests who I said at the top that I had great conversations with. I never know which guest to put first because I want to make sure you listen to both of them. Today I flipped a coin and Matthew Cortland won. Fascinating young man. He's a chronically ill, disabled lawyer and writer from Massachusetts. His legal practice focuses on helping patients navigate the healthcare system, and his activism is dedicated to advancing the recognition of healthcare as a human right. He writes about law, medicine, bioethics, chronic illness, disability, and more. And just he's been featured in every big major news outlet. Smart dude, comes highly recommended to me from my friend Rebecca Vallis, which is where we start. He is on Twitter, and he's pretty active on Twitter, so go find him at MattBC. You're going to love this guy. I love him, and I think you are as well. At MattBC on Twitter. And here we go. Very excited to have Matthew Cortland joining me. He comes highly recommended from our mutual friend, the brilliant Rebecca Vallis, who has done amazing work her whole career that coincides with your work. Matthew, welcome to Stand Up. Psyched to have you joining me.
Thank you so much. I go where Valis tells me to go.
Yeah.
I do what she tells me to do. I think we have that in common. It works out well.
Yeah, this is a person who's a real kind of brilliant boss. Like if she tells me to do anything, I'm like, are you sure? But I would, because I trust her so much.
Yeah, actually, Rebecca Valis is one of the first people who welcomed me to the DC policy scene, because it's something of a tight club. And if you, as a disabled person who at the time I relied on SSI and was fighting with SNAP benefits, and she was at one of these the powerful, great and the good think tanks, and had me in, and we had a great conversation. And so
I'd love to hear more about like that world and that community and your entry into it. But before I get into it, and hopefully we have time to come back to it, because I actually am very interested in it. She did the same for me. I mean, I never worked in it, but she, as a media member, she's like, talk to these people, go out with drinks with these people, and have them on your show. But I just want to get a little bit of background on you. I mean, at what point did you start getting involved with advocacy and policy, and how much of it was due to your own struggles?
I got involved in this world when a for-profit health insurance company tried to kill me when I was a college undergraduate.
Got it. That'll do it.
I am not supposed to be. I am a lawyer. I'm not supposed to be a lawyer. My undergraduate degree is in human development from the State University of New York at Binghamton, which is what they call counseling psych up there. I got into Teachers College at Columbia University. Just going to go do a master's degree in dev psych. I was going to, graduate school. I had a trajectory all planned out. And then I got sick. I had a flare of what turned out to be inflammatory bowel disease, particularly Crohn's disease. And before it was diagnosed, I was at college in upstate New York. I got incredibly sick. I couldn't go to class. I couldn't really leave the dorm. A friend put me in their car because it turned out my health insurance network stopped at the Massachusetts border. I did not have coverage in New York. There were no doctors in network. And so for me to get medical care, a friend had to drive me back to Massachusetts. And I started going to see doctors. And I was this young 20-something kid. I didn't know anything about this world. And I remember going to see my primary care doctor. He wrote stat at the top of an order for a CT scan. And he told me, when you get there, if they take anyone who isn't actively bleeding out from a gunshot wound or a stab wound, you have to call me immediately. You are in real trouble.
Wow, that really paints a situation. We understand the urgency of your health issue. You grew up in Massachusetts, went to school in New York, near where I grew up. Actually, I grew up in Syracuse, and it's a great school. SUNY Binghamton, I think it's probably they say it's the best of the New York State schools. And
it's the flagship of the SUNYs.
Is it really? But had you had any experience with the healthcare system? Had you had any issues growing up in Massachusetts?
I mean, I went to see a pediatrician, for the annual school physical, but that was really my first exposure to the world of the medical industrial complex is getting tossed into the deep end of the pool. And, I tell that story and people like you say, wow, you can really get the urgency from that. But who didn't get the urgency was the health insurance company. In Massachusetts, if you're sick, if you're pretty sick, you get sent up to Boston, we call it. I got sent up to Mass General Hospital, MGH, which sarcastically gets referred to as, quote, man's greatest hospital. It's a teaching hospital of Harvard University, the great and the good. I saw a GI doc there who is one of the leaders in gastroenterology. I'm sure his CV is like 50 pages, hundreds of peer-reviewed publications, professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. And he's telling me, Matt, you're in real trouble. We're going to start you on this medication. And it went well for a little while. And then I developed a resistance to that medication. It's this infusion. A lot of people have heard of it since, called Remicade. And it's derived in part from a mouse protein. And it turns out if you put a mouse protein derived substance into your body long enough, you tend to develop antibodies to it. And so my immune system was attacking the drug that was supposed to calm my immune system down. And I couldn't eat food. I was down to 130 pounds. I'm 6 feet tall. I was at 130 pounds. I was in constant pain. It was a nightmare. And he said, well, we need to get you on this new medication called Humira. And nowadays, everyone has probably seen an advertisement for Humira because they really like to advertise Humira. It makes billions of dollars.
That's a statement you can only say in America. You've probably seen the advertisement for this drug. No, we're the only country that advertises for drugs, right?
Absolutely. It's so wild. You go to the UK and you talk about this and they're like, what? What? It's like your advert. It's
ask your doctor
bizarre.
about. No, don't ask your doctor about this. Don't do that.
But he wanted to put me on this medication, and it was approved for ulcerative colitis, a related disease. It wasn't yet FDA approved for Crohn's, and that gave the insurance company a reason to deny the prior authorization. Prior authorization is another way of saying begging an insurance company for permission for the drug that you need to keep alive. And a 72-hour emergency appeal of that prior authorization denial, they stretched it out for 2.5 months, doing stuff that we sent them the appeal. They said they didn't get it. We sent it with the green card, the old style green card that USPS used to have. They said they didn't get that. I said, well, your employee's signature is on this. We need to alert the postal authorities. Someone's committing mail fraud, claiming to get your mail fraud. Well, they said fax it into us. Fax it in. They say they didn't get the fax. Fax in the fax receipt. They say they didn't get that. Send it all in via FedEx and have a guy from FedEx stand there while they sign for it. Oh, then they said, you didn't actually give your doctor permission to file this appeal on your behalf.
No.
Here's your handbook, company that shall remain nameless so that they don't sue both of us. Here's your handbook that says that the doctor has authority and I don't need to grant authority. 2.5 months in, my team was very concerned. Someone got me a lawyer. The lawyer met with me. He faxed a demand letter to this insurance company, and by the close of business the next day, I had the prior authorization in hand. And at that point, I realized I'm going to have to change it up. I don't get to be a developmental psychologist working with kids who have survived child abuse. I don't get to do that because I live in this country. The United States is going to get another pissed off lawyer, exactly what this country needs. And so I went to grad school. I went to the Boston University Graduate School of Public Health for 2 years. And then I did 3 years of law school. I have a law school degree from what then was the George Mason University School of Law. It's now the Antonin Scalia School of Law, one of the most conservative real law schools in the country, because I figured if you're going to do this, you might as well spend time arguing with people who think that you and everyone you love and care about should be dead. Like, see what the best they have to offer is.
Jesus, what was that like? I mean, we could talk for hours about your law school experience. I mean, were all of the students, generally speaking, on the more conservative end of the legal and political spectrum?
Hell yes. Now, the students, the faculty in particular,
boy, yeah,
hardcore. And I was coming in as someone who is relatively new to the world of chronic illness and being like, I need some reasonable accommodations on the basis of disability. And my first real interaction with the law school was them threatening me with discipline, including an up till expulsion, if I told any of my professors about these disability accommodation letters that the university had given me to give to my professors.
What?
Yeah, that's the sort of supportive student environment they had there. And so, my time there ended with me filing a complaint with the U.S. Department of Education Civil Rights Division over disability discrimination. I was arguing every day with professors who thought healthcare wasn't a human right, don't believe in what we call positive rights, things like the right to healthcare, the right to have a roof over your head, the right to have food, the sort of basics that a society, like a functioning society, provides. And they when they felt bored, they'd cold call on me and have a go at me, and we'd go back and forth, and my classmates would be, oh, there he goes again. And many of those people are now, it's a pipeline into like the conservative legal establishment.
Yeah, where are they all now?
they did. They clerked for the Supreme Court justices. You might imagine the Robertses and the Thomases. One of them is now a rising star in the conservative legal movement. Josh Blackman is this guy who writes about defending the attacks on the ACA. There's no attack on the ACA that Josh Blackman won't defend. He was at George Mason when I was at George Mason. That was it was really just a wild law school experience.
Let me just unpack this one idea, this phrase that we hear so much: healthcare is a right. I mean, most countries kind of believe that, and they're astonished by the American healthcare system just in terms of the lack of morality. But I feel like sometimes it's good to separate it and talk about health insurance, because that's really more. I'm not going to say it's more the problem. You correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but the problem is that people don't have insurance more than anything else. And without insurance, you don't go to see the doctor. You can't afford drugs. You can't afford your treatments. You can really get, and so sometimes people will say, well, yeah, anybody can get health care. Just go to the emergency room. But of course, that's not health care if you have breast cancer and you need a mammogram and so on and so forth. So how do you see that idea that healthcare is a right? What should we have, and what country system might you compare it to, or even our own system? I mean, I know you can take apart Medicare, but a lot of people just talk about Medicare for all. What do you mean policy-wise when you say healthcare should be a right?
When I talk about healthcare being a human right in the United States to people, to Americans, what I actually like to talk about is public education. Because that is the positive right that America has that most people are familiar with. Your kid has a right to an education provided by the public, by your local school entity. And I'm being a little vague because depending on where you are in the country, it might be called a school board, a school commission, a special, but you get the idea. Your second grader has the right to a publicly financed education, because we've all agreed that having children be educated is good for us all. Even if you don't have a kid in the public school system, you are probably in some way or another paying for that public education. And yeah, we can talk about the inequity in how property taxes finance public education and how we need a more level playing field for that financing. And I completely agree. I'm completely on board. But we all, most of us, some people like maybe the Tucker Carlsons of the world will, disagree with me here. But we don't say to a third grader, you've got to come up with that tuition money, kid. Get out there, get that paper out. Why aren't you selling lemonade after school? We say, as a society, it benefits us all to provide an education as a matter of right. And as a matter of fact, a lot of state constitutions actually have that right to a public education codified in the constitution of that state. So, our opponents on the other side of this debate will say public right, positive rights, the right to have something. That's not an American concept, but actually they're incredibly wrong. And millions of American school children every day prove them wrong. What we hear about, it's absolutely the case that you have to finance this stuff. In the same way that we finance public education through taxing, we could finance healthcare the same way. And just as you hear this argument, they'll push back and say, well, what are you going to do? You're going to press doctors into service, quote unquote. That's an argument that we hear when we talk about healthcare as a human right. As if the public school teachers teaching your kids have been press ganged into being, Mrs. Smith's kindergarten classroom. And she's actually trapped there. No, that's not how the world works. Like every other country has figured this out. And as a matter of fact, the United States has figured this out when we talk about education. So what does it mean to have a positive right to healthcare? It means that there has to be coverage. Absolutely. Coverage is essential. Got to pay for it. Got to pay for it.
The United States has also tell me if I'm wrong here, but the United States has also figured out health care as a right for people 65 and over who it's great. Again, there are problems, but anybody 65 and under, it's socialism. Matthew, what's the difference in terms of the theory about health care, about insurance being provided for that you paid into for Medicare for Americans? If you make it to 65, It's like a weird sprint. I'm in it right now. I'm 45 and I'm an independent contractor. And I kind of think about that. I'm like, well, at least in 20 years, I won't have to pay out of pocket, even though because I already did for health insurance. What's the difference there? What happens when we turn 65?
Well, the Medicare ferry comes to visit you at night, sprinkle some Medicare dust on your pillow. That's got to be it, right? Because otherwise, why is there this arbitrary age? It certainly isn't the cynical thing about older people voting more, and therefore politicians feel the need to treat the older constituency better because they know that those people are more likely to vote.
They're the most expensive customers, though. They're the most expensive customers for health insurance, for healthcare providers, and yet they're the ones that get it paid for. It would be so much cheaper to pay for me, you, and certainly my kids.
Well, it wouldn't be cheaper to pay for me. It costs anywhere, a cheap year to keep me alive is about $250,000 USD.
Right. You are a burden, which is what I want to get into next, because I want to get into disability and the way that so many people really do see it as your fault. It's a burden. If only you weren't a drag on the system. And most importantly, I think it's because you're unmotivated and lazy. Like why don't you just walk it off? What is it? I mean, your disability is Crohn's. Walk it off. Or, cerebral palsy. Walk it off. But so many people just have a real misconception of SSI, SSDI. I don't even know the difference between them. And I want to talk about that and humanize it the way that you do so well. What should people know? Most of us don't. We don't know people who are getting these benefits. And so it's so easy to demonize them.
I always am experimenting with how to talk about this because it part of what you just said just hits the nail on the head.
Yeah.
We have these programs that are named in the most obscure, confusing way possible. And I'm not sure it's not on purpose to make it harder to talk to folks about, right? There are these two different disability insurance programs, SSI and SSDI. And as an attorney who has represented folks trying to get these benefits, sometimes folks don't even know the benefits that they're receiving because it's so opaque. It is so confusing. Growing up, I used to hear, before Massachusetts, we're pretentious as hell here in Massachusetts. So we don't have a Department of Motor Vehicles. We have a registry of motor vehicles that we all call the RMV instead of the DMV. And back in the day when I was a kid, everyone used to hate going to the RMV because the lines were forever and everyone was real surly and sort of angry and like, here's your ticket, go sit down. And you wait there for 3 hours. And then actually the window that you've been waiting on, that person went home and, you're just screwed. There is some of that spirit in today's Social Security Administration, particularly after 4 years of Trump appointees running the agency. And to be honest with you, those guys, they're still there. A guy named Saul and a guy named Black, Saul and Black, are still running the Social Security Administration. And that dude Black, they're bad people.
Why are they still there?
People. You know what? I don't know.
Really? Come on. I'm surprised that you haven't started some kind of PR campaign or movement to get rid of them. I mean, these are bad. These guys are. I don't know anything about them or, frankly, the program. That's just why I'm talking to you. But I do know that so many of the Trump appointees were appointed so they could destroy the agency they were in charge of, from EPA to the post office. So I just assume that's the case here, especially with how much hatred there is on the right for helping people that are, disabled, that through no fault of their own, who have come up on any kind of number of circumstances. It's, I don't want to pay for them type of attitude. So I worry they're there just trying to destroy it. Is that the case?
Okay, two things. First of all, the hashtag is #Fire Saul and Black.
Oh yeah,
it's been out there for a while. Started that a couple of months ago. I think that the current administration just hasn't had the bandwidth to pay attention to Social Security. It's one of those programs that, unless you make noise, people tend not to pay attention. And so I'm not actually that surprised that there are these two Trump guys burrowed into that agency, like holding on for dear life. And it's unfortunate because they are really in charge of setting policy for the safety net. SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance. That's what SSDI stands for. And if you work a job that's a W-2, you're paying into the system, you're paying taxes. One of the items on that pay stub you might be seeing is you paying into the SSDI insurance system. Just like you pay into the unemployment insurance system, you pay into the SSDI system.
Yeah, and I'm never going to get that money back because it's going to lazy people like you. That's how I see it. That's how people, I don't see it. That's how people see it, right? Don't they see that as throwing their money away?
We'll get to me. I'm just a moocher. I'm a straight up moocher.
Right.
It's worse than that.
Okay.
But people who pay into the SSDI system are doing it so that if they get a cancer diagnosis, if they have a flare of MS, and they need to take some time for treatment. If all of these things that can happen because life is hard,
it's
and
insurance
messy and complicated, and bad things happen to good people.
Yes.
You know, I was 6 years and I'm you know what? I'm gonna make some people in the disability community angry when I say bad things happen to good people. But I was 6 years old when I first had a Crohn's flare, and I didn't know what was happening to me, and it was hell, and it hurt, and I thought I was dying, and I would not wish that on anyone. It was terrible. I didn't do anything wrong, and you're getting at the point here, which is there's this other program called SSI. It stands for Supplemental Security Income. That is for people who don't have the work credits, they're called, haven't paid into the system. But we as a society have realized, you know what, we shouldn't just let disabled people die on the streets. That we don't have to do that. That's not fair. That's not just. That isn't, this is going to be wonky as hell and people are going to mock me for this, but I'm just going to say it. I'm at heart a Rawlsian, a disciple of John Rawls, this guy who came up with the theory of justice that says, you should try to set up a society so that if you don't know what role you will play in that society, you would still think, wherever you could land by random chance, that society was just. I didn't know that I was going to develop Crohn's disease. I didn't know that at the age of 6, I was going to be, thinking I was dying on a bathroom floor. I didn't know that this pharmaceutical company was going to charge $30,000 a month for the medication I need to stay alive. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know that I wasn't going to be able to hold down a job because I was literally not going to be able to leave the bathroom for 8 hours at a time. And you try to set up a society that's fair and equitable and just and accounts for stuff like that. And you say, well, what should SSI do? Because right now, what SSI is, it's like trying to get through some sort of gladiatorial arena of proving that you're disabled enough to this hostile agency. And you usually don't have a lawyer because there's no one to pay for a lawyer. And if you prove that you're disabled enough, you get the grand sum, the grand prize of a maximum of $794 a month to live on. $700.
The good life.
And $94. It's not, you're not high rollers. You're not a whale at the MGM Grand at that point. You are struggling to find a place to live.
And it all depends on where you live, and it depends on, I guess there's probably no measure for these statistics. Maybe sometimes there's been in terms of dependence, in terms of who else you might be taking care of because you're a good person or because you're a responsible person. And so $794 is not the same everywhere for everybody. It's never nearly enough. And
yeah, but the feds are still, you're maxing out at $794, whether or not you're in New York City or whether you're in Oklahoma, you're getting the same maximum. And to be clear, it's a maximum. Most people are getting below the maximum because there are these other rules. If you are relying on SSI and someone gives you a plate of food, you are technically supposed to report that to the Social Security Administration so that they can reduce your benefit.
What?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Anyone who gives you any sort of help in terms of food or shelter, if you have a family member who happens to have a spare room in you're trying to get on your feet, you're trying to make ends meet, you're trying to survive on this at most $794 a month, and you take that room, they're going to cut your benefits by up to a third.
Just never get ahead. You never get. I mean, who would know these kind of loopholes and issues? I mean, you talk about when you couldn't work and you wanted to enroll to get supplemental, food assistance, SNAP, and the idea. I mean, we had this when I lost my corporate gig. My wife, who has almost a master's, trying to navigate the health insurance. Like, you have to be a lawyer to kind of figure out how to get food assistance, and that's the point to some extent. Certainly in certain states, it's way harder than in others. We've heard a lot about that, and Florida, as a result of the pandemic, they purposely make it hard. They purposely make it confusing, and a lot of people that are trying to enroll don't have a whole bunch of degrees or a lot of education. And my wife, I just remember my wife, who's cried like twice in our 20-year relationship, like getting emotional. And she said, Matthew, while she was upset, what if I didn't speak English? This is hard enough. So the point is, how hard is it, and how hard is it meant to be to navigate these programs that very few people end up even qualifying for? And even when they do, you're saying the benefits are so meager, it's almost impossible to survive.
I wrote a piece for Talk Poverty about the SNAP application fiasco.
Yeah, I read it. It was great. Everybody should read it. It really made me upset.
I redacted a letter so that I wasn't doxing myself, because, the internet is full of people who are, but I wrote to the government of Massachusetts. Yeah. And that letter, it wasn't just the stamp and the envelope and the toner and the ink. It was $500,000 of education and 5 years of graduate training that let me write that letter. And frankly, that is not a scalable solution. I think instead of sending everyone to law school in order to be able to get SNAP, what used to be called food stamps, in order to be able to get your family SNAP benefits, I think we should make it easier to apply so that you don't need a law degree in order to navigate the application process. And to be honest with you, SSI and SSDI, these safety net programs from Social Security for disability, are 10 times worse than SNAP. The SSI application, I put more work into that application than I have put into arguing appellate cases in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Insane. That is an insane thing to say.
It's wild. It's absolutely wild. And it's, you know what? I won because I put hundreds of hours into my application and because I had been a lawyer. But most people trying to qualify for SSI are not lawyers. They did not make the mistake of going to law school like I did. They have useful skills and can contribute meaningfully to society. And so I think that you're absolutely right. You shouldn't need to be a lawyer to get SNAP. You shouldn't need to be a lawyer to get SSI or SSDI. But for a lot of folks, because the system is hostile, fundamentally, the system isn't trying to help everyone who needs to be helped. The system is set up fundamentally to try to find that maybe 1 out of 1,000 people who is a scammer. And if the system has to deny 200 people out of the 1,000 who should get benefits to catch that one scammer, that's what the system is going to do right now.
Yeah, people talk a lot about fraud, and it's just so almost non-existent. I mean, it's but not in the minds of people with their anecdotes. Yeah, but this guy, he's getting government assistance. He's totally able-bodied. He's got no problems, and it's just like, how do you know? I think you touched on this when you're talking about, if someone gives you food or a place to live. What are asset limits? And you have experience again with this, and why do you think they should be changed?
If you rely on SSI as a single, not married individual, you are allowed to have $2,000 to your name. If you have $2,001 to your name, they shut off your SSI benefits. So you stop getting that $794 a month maximum. You lose access to Medicaid because SSI comes with Medicaid, which is the reason why for a lot of medically complex people, SSI is a program that they really need, they really rely on. You can lose the Medicaid eligibility. And it's just absurd. $2,000 to your name. I think about the pandemic. I think about the fire season that we had. I guess it was time is a flat circle, and this month feels like a year, and also like 30 minutes. But I guess it was a couple of years ago, the really bad forest fire season out on the West Coast. I think about Texas's frost that killed the power grid, and I think about all of the disabled people who rely on things like ventilators in order to be able to breathe, who have insulin in their refrigerator that they need to be able to have and use in order to literally stay alive. Like, I think about all of these vital things that this country says you're on your own, you got to pay for it yourself. And it says to people who rely on SSI, by the way, you're not allowed to save up money for the rainy days that in fact could kill you, because as an individual, you're allowed to save $2,000. You get married, I'll come back to that in a moment, because SSI really makes it hard to get married. You're allowed to have not $4,000. It's not doubled. It's only $3,000. So yeah, it's just mean-spirited. It's just mean-spirited. And if you are someone who relies on SSI and you want to get married to someone who relies on SSI, so two people who rely on SSI getting married, the asset limit doesn't go to $4,000 for a couple. It goes to $3,000. Oh, and because you two are married and you both rely on SSI, we're reducing that $794 that you're getting a month. We're taking a quarter right off the top as a marriage penalty, because you two should be more efficient and save money, because two disabled people living together, that's notoriously easy, he says, as his disabled partner is in the other room with a migraine.
Man.
It's just a mean-spirited system. And there are these asset limits that haven't been updated in decades that prevent people from saving money for a rainy day. And, the rest of the federal government hasn't been exactly great about keeping disabled people alive. FEMA ain't that, they really did fall down when it came to helping people on the West Coast, to helping people in Texas, to keeping the disability community alive during the pandemic. And so, we tell people to save, but we don't allow them to. We punish them if they save more than $2,000. Or $3,000 if they're married.
I realize we've been talking for a while. I know I'll let you go, but I haven't gotten to so many other questions I want to ask. So let me just let's just do some myth busting at the end here. Well, two more big questions. What are some of the biggest myths about disability benefits?
It's just the confusion, because how the public thinks about being disabled, there's a lot of stigma. I get it. There's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of misinformation. And it's in part because the government has so many different definitions of what it means to be disabled. If you've got a kid in public school, your kid might qualify for an individual education plan, an IEP. I know a lot of parents go to these IEP meetings. They fight their schools to make sure their disabled kids get what they're entitled to under the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, the IDEA. That's one definition of disability. At your workplace, you might be entitled to reasonable accommodations on the basis of disability under what we call the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, because, for example, like my partner, you have migraines. Migraines are a chronic illness that qualify, and I am a legal expert in the thing I am about to say, can qualify as a disability within the meaning of the ADA. And so those cubicle lights that, Fizz plant won't replace, that the fluorescence, like, you might have the law on your side in demanding your employer put in halogens or like a dimmer switch, right? This is stuff that people just don't know about, in part because it's so confusing. And then you've got these other disability programs. You've got SSI, you've got SSDI, you've got the VA doing their own disability ratings. And historically, they've been horrible. The VA has had a backlog. They've been antagonistic towards disabled veterans. And then once you get into their hospital system, we all know what the lying that they did was. So part of it is just the confusion. And what I would say is the community is much bigger than most people think it is. Chronic illnesses are oftentimes disabilities within the meaning of the ADA. Kids with disabilities are entitled as a matter of law to a free and appropriate public education. We are everywhere, is what I'm trying to say. Disabled people make up a quarter of this country's population. We are not going anywhere.
Yeah, it's a really good point that I don't know if there's a way to some kind of snappy way to talk about it, but that you can't see a huge percentage of people with disabilities. You can't see them. we so often think that we can literally see people with that person has a disability. But if I saw you on the street or your partner on the street, I wouldn't recognize either of your disabilities. And so,
absolutely.
So that's a really important one. We could talk about myths forever, but I do want to just ask you about, we've heard a lot about this government spending with Biden and Democrats having control, and we could break it all down and so on. But I think one of the top line great headlines that progressives are seeing and that everybody should see is that we're going to cut child poverty. Some people say in a third, some people say in a half. What is there in these bailout? I don't want to say bailouts, in any of these government plans for people with disabilities, living with disabilities, and what do you wish were in there?
My top priority, one of my top priorities right now is this. It sounds super wonky when you talk about home and community care, but 131,000 disabled people died in nursing homes, so-called nursing homes, in just the last year from COVID. In nursing homes, nursing is a great word. People love nurses. I love nurses. Most trusted profession. I am alive, literally alive, thanks to great nursing care. Everybody loves homes. Homes is a really positive word. You put these two things together, though, nursing homes, and you actually are talking about some of the most grim, depressing, unsafe, filthy facilities in all of the United States of America, where we warehouse people. It's real hard to talk about because you can't bring a camera crew into one of these facilities.
Yeah, that would be unethical.
Privacy rights of the people who live there. But I have three loved ones in a nursing home because even with all of my skills and training and expertise, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts just refused to pay for additional services to allow them to stay at home, even though it was safer, even though it was cheaper, even though that's where they wanted to be. And so they were forced into one of these nursing homes. And I would get a text message every day for the last year telling me that 20 people had died, and then 21 people had died, and then 22 people had died, and then 23 people had died, out of a total population of about 100 people. About a quarter of the disabled people, and let's be clear, you don't go live in a nursing home because almost everyone in a nursing home is there because Medicaid, not Medicare, Medicaid, the program for poor people, is paying for it. You don't go live in a nursing home unless you are disabled. You have to meet, there's this threshold before they sign the papers and the government pays. You have to prove that you're disabled and that you require that level of service. So we are talking about 131,000 people, human beings, that we condemn to death because they're disabled. And it didn't have to happen. They should have been in their own homes. We know that people want to be in their own homes. We know how to do this. So people tell me that home care isn't about infrastructure, and it's entirely about infrastructure. It's about the infrastructure in this country of nursing homes that does not value the lives of your grandma, your grandpa, your aunt, your cousins, maybe you, because it's not just old people in these facilities. People my age are oftentimes forced into these facilities from the disability community because, and here's the great part about what Joe Biden is proposing, we could instead pay the workforce that is disproportionately made up of Black and brown women a living wage instead of poverty wages. We could ensure that these are good union jobs with bargaining rights and workforce protections, and we could send them to people's homes where they want to be, and we will save money. Except this, at the end of the day, for me, this isn't really about money. It's about doing the right thing because, my God, we killed 131,000 people. I don't know how you move on from that. I have nightmares about that. I literally wake up screaming in my sleep because we killed 131,000 people. And so, that's entirely about infrastructure, and it's entirely about jobs, and it's entirely about being the kind of country that everyone says, in those halls of the lofty rhetoric in the halls of Congress, people say we're a great nation. Well, a great nation doesn't condemn old people to go to a home where no one comes to visit, where you're on your own, where the staff don't care about you because they're overworked and underpaid, and they're one staff member taking care of 20 residents.
You can't be. You just can't ever be referred to as a great society if you don't have universal health care. You can't. It's not even fun to debate with people. If every other country, civilized, industrialized, rich country, has what we have, but
all those OECD countries, they have health care for everyone.
$800 billion every year on defense. I mean, and they don't. So that's the difference. We're protecting all of them with our battleships.
They don't have to hold a fundraiser for their next battleship, right? They make ships that don't work. They're destroyers.
That actually reminds me I have to do a live read. Folks, we've got a new battleship fundraiser coming up this week, and so I hope everybody will donate because tax revenues are just not going to do it, and we need another high-tech battleship to fight ghosts as opposed to what is really killing people, which is diabetes and cancer.
I'm in for $20.
Matthew, it is so great talking to you. Can we do part 2 and 3 and 4? I really enjoy this. You're a super passionate, very intelligent guy, and I learned a lot already, and I have so many more questions for you.
Thanks for having me. It was really great to be here.
Am I right? Did you fall in love with that guy? I mean, he had such a great sense of humor. I'm so looking forward to getting to know him better and his personality better, and he's super passionate and brilliant, as I knew he would be because he came so highly recommended from one of the smartest people I know, Rebecca Vallis. So thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Matthew. Go follow him on Twitter right now, @MattBC. Go tell him that you enjoyed our conversation and support his work. He's on Patreon as well, if you want to support him over there, patreon.com/MattBC. Okay, so you probably know I am always interested in talking about foreign policy and domestic policy and foreign terrorism and domestic terrorism. Well, there are no better experts than the fine folks over at the Soufan Group, which my friend, very good friend, founded years back after his career in the FBI, Ali Soufan, of course, and wrote great books, has written 2 great books about it. Well, the new executive director of the Soufan Group has had quite a career in counter-terrorism analysis, and I was really excited to have a conversation with her for the first time. Both these guests on the podcast for the first time today. I always love to introduce you to new folks and new policy experts, and we had a really great conversation about their new study on the QAnon movement, its influence on American extremism. We talked about her past work on foreign extremism and how it all coincides and what we can all do about it and learn about it. So I'm very excited to share with you now my conversation with the new executive director at the Soufan Center, which you should also follow on Twitter, at the Soufan Center. It's at Naureen C. Fink on Twitter. Here we go. All right, Naureen joins me now, and I'm very excited to have her on for the first time because I always love talking with my friend Ali Soufan, but I'm very excited to welcome you into the organization or onto my podcast, a new person from the organization onto my podcast. Thank you for joining me, Naureen.
Thanks for having me, Pete. Ali's got, big shoes to fill, and I have very small feet, but I will do my best.
I appreciate your modesty. I've been prepping for you, and you've been covering this stuff and studying these issues for a very long time. So I'm psyched to have you on to ask you a whole bunch of questions. And I want to talk, of course, about your recent press release, the QAnon movement and the threat to United States national security. Now, I thought it was over because I thought they found Q and there's no more Q drops, and so we don't have to worry about it anymore.
Well, I'm going to disagree there because we are worried. One of the things that the QAnon conspiracy movement did is it really acted like a kind of force multiplier for a number of grievances, right? So it kind of laid the grounds for distrust and discord, we think, in a very dangerous way. So yes, some of the specific things they were worried about, whether the Biden inauguration and the end of the Trump administration, Q drop, some of those things appear to have faded. But a lot of the things that I think the legacy impact of it is distrust in government, distrust in science, the believability of these extraordinary claims about, Satan worshiping, sex trafficking elites. And of course, elites only from one party, not both parties, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, unfortunately, the legacy of Q really remains with us. And, once you lay that groundwork for distrust and discord, it's much easier to amplify, because some of the grievances, of course, are real. People are pissed off and upset. It's been a rough year for everybody. Good for some, but rough for most. And so I think that QAnon has created a number of openings, really, for both domestic, it is a domestic phenomenon, but domestic and international actors to amplify.
How is, in your report, you talk about how QAnon has influenced actors in Russia, China, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, who have all entered the fray, amplifying QAnon messaging, most likely, you say, as a means to sow further discord and division among the American population. How are they doing that? Why are they doing that? How do they benefit from it?
Well, first of all, in an age of great power competition, where we're not just talking about domestic discord and distrust, but we're talking about Russia, China, the U.S. Going at it hammer and tongs, in terms of vying for that supremacy in international affairs, any kind of internal division on that scale benefits malign actors, right? The weaknesses we show benefit them in the long run. And of course, we had reports of foreign interference around the elections. The report highlights kind of two peak areas for foreign interference: the onset of the COVID pandemic and around election season. So, we always have to remember that whether we do it to ourselves or let others amplify it, internal divisions in the U.S., and certainly if they, contribute to things like January 6th, like the insurrection, benefit malign actors who would be happy to take up America's position in great power competition.
Or at least, I guess, weaken our position in the world by having us fight with each other.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. We're kind of doing their work for them in that case. But again, we've specified that the report doesn't say they started QAnon.
Right.
It started here. We made the mess here. It's our challenge to deal with, but it does give them opportunity to amplify it. And, we have seen, interestingly, international supporters. There's been QAnon festivals in European countries, in Germany and Finland. In Germany, there was an attack on a home for an immigrant home for asylum seekers, and there were 9 people killed in Hanau. And the guy was a QAnon supporter, but also, a neo-Nazi xenophobe.
A QAnon festival actually sounds fun until you find out what it is. It sounds like it would be a great party, and then like, wait, who's going to be there? What are they going to be discussing? I don't think.
Yeah, and you think that maybe these are kind of hyperbole and that someone is kind of exaggerating to make the party sound like more fun, and then you realize no, they genuinely believe it. And the conspiracy theories kind of proved resilient against fact because they keep moving the goalpost. When it was oh, for sure, there's no way Biden's going to be inaugurated. And of course he was. Then the goalpost moved to March 4th. March 4th will have the true president. Well, March 4th came and went, and we do have the true president certified by a democratic process in the U.S. So I think that's one of the challenges with conspiracy theories is they keep moving the goalpost so that everything seems to be legitimate.
But isn't that one of the ways that a movement loses power and begins to deteriorate when the things that they predicted, whether it's a caliphate or Trump's coming back, don't happen, or when the promises that they make don't come through, that people start to go, you know what, I think I'm going to go home, I'm going to join another organization. It doesn't always happen that way. And when we're talking about, terrorism, counterterrorism, we have to be very careful that we understand things aren't monolithic and we don't use generalizations. But doesn't it start to deteriorate when the promises you make, the predictions that you make don't necessarily come through?
I mean, if the predictions can be reinterpreted and say, okay, maybe we made a mistake. It's not March 4th, but soon there will be something. Yeah. And of course, until that something comes and you can reinterpret, there's that. One of the other things we've seen is where people have expressed, frustration and disappointment. You've had other hardline extremist groups come in and recruit and say, yeah, look, you were kind of, you were suckered into this conspiracy and look, it didn't come true. But the points you raise are valid and some of your grievances are valid. Come join us. And so you have more hardline extremist groups recruiting among the frustrated adherents, which is another danger, right?
Help me understand just a little bit about your background and your experience. I feel like you've spent most of your career looking at extremists and terrorism around the world, but not as much here in the United States of America, and that's true of most analysts. Is that somewhat close to accurate?
This is true, and it's also reflective of the general policy direction, right? I started working on broader international security issues, looking at the role of actors like the UN and conflict, and then zeroed in quite a bit on the question of terrorism, because interestingly, a lot of the international responses we take for granted weren't really there before 9/11. Terrorism was always considered something countries dealt with within their borders. There wasn't like an obvious role for the UN and other actors to deal with terrorism. And then, of course, come 9/11, we suddenly have a group that spans political borders, that doesn't have an ask that is, that you can negotiate. They're not asking for a seat at the political table. They're trying to blow up the political table.
And so as a result of that, as a result of 9/11, wasn't generally the world community, certainly the U.S. And our allies, the posture was to crush the terrorists, to crush them, to capture them, to kill them. At times we tortured them, to surveil Americans, do whatever you can to make sure that they never succeed in a spectacular terrorist attack and kill hundreds or thousands of Americans or more. Wasn't that the general posture? Crush the terrorists?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I want to get a short answer on that, because I feel like the difference here is there's a certain segment, a large segment, the entire Republican Party, not the entire Republican Party, a lot of Republicans, certainly Donald Trump, that do not want to crush the terrorists, because in this case, the terrorists are their voters. They're their actual voters and constituents. They have to walk a very careful line about what they say and certainly what they do in terms of policy, because these are their actual voters. And so it's far more difficult and more dangerous here now at home, because these are Americans who are actually also voters and constituents, than Al-Qaeda ever was. That's how I feel, and I'm sorry to simplify it, and you're probably going to tell me it's not that simple.
Not at all. In fact, you've answered the question, and that's exactly it. First of all, they are voters. They look and sound like the party, right? It's not so easy to call them others who believe in something far-fetched and foreign. And until January 6th, there wasn't, I'll be really honest, there also wasn't like a single mass casualty attack that, drove people to recognize this as the same form of terrorism.
Well, I mean, Oklahoma City.
But a lot of people keep forgetting that. I have to say it. A lot of people forget that we've had acts of domestic terrorism on that scale at home.
But we've had smaller acts of domestic terrorism far more than we've had smaller acts of foreign terrorism.
I absolutely agree with you, but we don't have domestic terrorist groups because we don't have domestic terrorism designations, right? We don't have a federal terrorism statute. And so people just don't think of, and I'm talking about perception here, right? People don't think of these as terrorists because we're also not designating them as terrorists. And I think one of the challenges we have, and we were talking about the international domestic thing, because international acts of terrorism are actually more clearly defined. So you can stick a label on it, you can stick sanctions on it, you can actually mobilize law enforcement and military action around it. At home, we don't have the legal, designation for terrorist groups. And as you say, as long as it's in the pre-crime space, a lot of what is being said and done is still legal in the US. And that makes us unique. Like in Germany, raising your hand and saying Heil Hitler and getting a, merchandise with a swastika on it is just not legal. here it is. So we have some unique challenges in dealing with it here at home.
Yeah, and we can talk about how effective those kinds of laws are around speech in Germany and whether or not they're counterproductive. I've heard some analysts say that sometimes banning speech and you know, Nazi symbols actually makes it worse. I have no idea, and I kind of side on the fact of censoring some speech. Frankly, I actually think that the most important development since January 6th, since the insurrection, the most important counter-terrorist measure that was taken wasn't taken by the government or anybody else. It was taken by Twitter, which was to kick Donald Trump off Twitter. I feel like that's the most important development that happened.
It is certainly a significant development, and it is, you know, it had crossed so many thresholds that they could justifiably take him off Twitter. I mean, he violated every single condition I think there was, and there was such a clear line of incitement, but it should make us uncomfortable, right? It should make us uncomfortable that the sitting president, a democratically elected sitting president of the United States, had to be kicked off for American security. And
I'm quibbling with your use of the word uncomfortable. Like it scares the shit out of me. Like it should make us uncomfortable. Like every time that guy talked, he inflamed people. Every time he tweeted, it was terrifying because of the way you would watch it reverberate for 24 hours.
I used to work for the British mission, so I have mastered, I think, the art of the understatement.
Yeah, okay.
Between the
That's
lines,
a good explanation.
Think of it as Brit speak. Whatever
Got
I'm saying
it. All right.
correctly, I mean like 500 times, right? It should make us horrifically uncomfortable, that our president crossed so many lines in saying the kinds of things he was saying. So his speech should make us uncomfortable. And that's really what I meant. It should make us really horrified that Twitter had to take action like that.
There's,
right?
Yes.
And I think there are questions about absolutely like about impact and you know, the Europeans are much more aggressive in taking down what they call online harmful content, online terrorist material. And of course, sometimes it goes in the other direction where, you know, kids looking at something for research will have their emails flagged and stuff. So we do constantly have to think about a balance, right? We have pretty horrific people or people who do horrific things still on Twitter as well.
Well, yeah, but we have, I mean, let me just to move it along. We have people saying horrific things every night on cable news, especially, and then they get shared millions more times on Twitter and other social media. And so I want to ask you how you would compare terrorist recruiters that worked in Al-Qaeda, ISIS, other extremist groups. A lot of people know about Anwar al-Awlaki, who was an American citizen, but he was making videos that were extremely effective at recruiting people who were sitting in their homes with an internet connection, including, I can remember, the San Bernardino guy and his wife, I think. But there were others, plenty of others. And of course, President Obama had him assassinated, which was a very controversial thing. But the point is they were recruiting online. And I feel like it's not too extreme to say that they're very similar to some of the mainstream, and maybe we don't want to name names, maybe we do, cable news hosts as well as congressmen in representatives, especially in, I would say exclusively in the Republican Party, because they are constantly saying things are happening that aren't happening and things didn't happen that did happen. And I feel like it's not too far to compare some of these media influencers and politicians to the recruiters in the terrorist groups that you've studied for your whole career. Am I wrong?
Well, I mean, part of the challenge with people like al-Awlaki is it's not just what he was saying that was illegal. He was part of a designated terrorist group, right? So you could have two people saying similar things. One is part of a designated terrorist group, so you can take action against them. One is, on cable news and you can't take action. And that's part of the challenge. And I think with online recruitment, one of the things we have seen really often is they pick up on what's already happening in the offline world. Like the online recruitment succeeds because the offline world creates the environment. So we saw, for example, when there were riots, where was it? Like in Ferguson, I think it was a few years ago, ISIS was just pulling that stuff on their, tweeting out, look at the injustice in America. America talks about human rights. Look at racial, inequality in America. Come to the Ummah, come to the Caliphate. There's no discrimination here. Yeah, we know that was BS, but, that's the narrative they put out. So a lot of times, and this comes back to the very first thing we were saying, the stuff we are doing in real life, whether it's police brutality, racial inequality, conspiracy theories, it gives them the fodder to use online. They don't always have to create stuff, right? We're creating content for them in a way. But we also know that people join not just because, social media amplifies it, but, your cool friend joins, your cool older brother joins, your mother puts pressure on you to atone for your sins, so you go join a group like this too. So I just wanted to flag that, yes, the online space is incredibly important for amplifying, but we should remember a lot of the recruitment is happening in offline worlds.
But I'm specifically theories like replacement theory. Like that used to be more located in the darker corners of the internet and
the wider corners. Sorry, I had to go there.
I'm so glad that you did. It's and I want to actually get to color in a minute too, but yes, for sure. And so, but a theory like that, that's now being amplified by Tucker Carlson and my former colleague who I shared a studio with, Steve Bannon.
Wow.
I worked with him at Sirius XM. With him, we shared a studio. I was terrified of him. But that's every night at 8:00. He's not talking about it every night, but he says it on cable news. And Jonathan Greenblatt of the Anti-Defamation League said, you got to fire this guy. He's out there talking about replacement theory. That used to be located just in the light web, as Naureen calls it.
I think that is the absolute terrifying thing we are seeing now is the normalization of what should have been fringe and extreme, right? Every country, every place, and every time in history, we have had an extremist fringe. The creation of the enabling environment, politicians, media personalities that normalize these extremist things, that is the really, really frightening thing we're seeing. And, I'm a student of history, for many years, looked at the rise of Hitler, the rise of Nazis. They didn't start, with all the crazy. They started laying the groundwork for craziness, and they did it through normalizing what should have been unacceptable narratives.
I think those of us who read those historians now are the most terrified, because you see so much of the similar behaviors, and then of course it being amplified so much faster on social media, and a lie can travel so much faster now than it could in fascist Italy, I suppose. And so it's
absolutely and there are two things we do forget when we think about World War II: the speed at which things went from, not zero, but from like 20 to 60, it was really fast. And a lot of it was done initially through legal channels. It was politicians, legitimizing this narrative. It was social, like middle-class businessmen, social actors blessing this kind of narrative in the Nazi Party. So we should really be reading those history books again.
What do you make about, how did you talk about the discussion that so many people had? It was often called like political correctness, but about that Islam was the issue and Muslims are terrorists. And obviously a lot of Americans still have all kinds of hatred towards Muslims that are being targeted every day. But there was this conversation about a religion of billions of people and lumping them all together. And then it's so easy for, liberal commentators like myself to just look back and be like, well, what about all the white people who are also Christian? And how much is Christianity at play? There's always this conversation about race and religion. But I want to get your take on specifically the domestic terrorist movement in America, the QAnon movement that you just have this report of. These are mostly white people. They're mostly men. They mostly live in rural areas. And a lot of times, like Al-Qaeda, they're just meeting up to have a group to hang out with, to identify with. So there are a lot of parallels, but it is true that they are mostly in one category of people. And I'm not sure how it serves us to talk about it, but it's not. Now it's politically incorrect to talk about white people because they're the terrorists, I feel.
Well, the attitude, clearly an issue with toxic masculinity and weapons in many of these movements. But, let's not also forget that when women speak up and you have figures like Ashley Babbitt, and the martyrdom of like the holy white female, it is very difficult to not, how do I put it? Okay. The presence of women sanitizes and legitimizes that narrative, right? It makes it seem less crazy because you've got your moms, your sisters, your daughters suddenly talking about it. It's about protecting children. It's about protecting a community. And what did used to seem like a bunch of guys sitting around just wanting to have an adventure and being very fringe suddenly starts to make sense. And I mean, ISIS mastered this, right? I mean, Al-Qaeda was not so open to recruitment. You had to like fill out forms in triplicates and have, references and all that. And they spend forever giving these long sermons about their ideas. ISIS was come one, come all. And that's what made them effective. They encouraged women to join. They encouraged, amateurs to join. And we are seeing similar trends, right? Right now we have different groups in the white supremacist or domestic violent extremist milieu. But we are also seeing a lot of transnational connections with groups in Europe, operational experience they're gaining by traveling to the Ukraine. So they may also start to coalesce soon.
Well, you mentioned toxic masculinity and weapons. And often what I think about is where the extremists who do have a desire to be violent, to take action in the rest of the world, jihadists, if you will, and in places like, let's say, Afghanistan or Pakistan or Yemen, the difference between those countries or even other underdeveloped countries or more corrupt countries and America is, in America, it's so much, I think it's a lot easier to get all kinds of weapons. Am I right that it's way easier to get all kinds of very violent weapons in America? And in some sectors of America, it's like the governor of Texas said we should be embarrassed that we don't have more gun sales. He tweeted that once. Like, am I right to say the access and inspiration to have a weapon is easier and more important in America than some of the countries I just named or any that you might mention that you're an expert on?
I mean, I don't know about a comparison with Afghanistan. Very few of my friends in Pakistan carry weapons, aspire to carry weapons, or talk about it.
But even if they wanted to,
I don't know about the comparison. I will say that our fascination with, the kinds of guns we use, and let's face it, most of these, you could protect yourself with a lot smaller weapons that are out there, right?
Yeah.
If it was really a question of protection. The fascination with guns and violence here certainly sets us apart from many of our Western allies and Western peers.
Yeah.
Right. It's difficult to compare with the conflict zone, although, it's interesting. But we have a problem here, which I still don't have an answer to, because, in countries like Switzerland, everybody's had their hands on a weapon at some point. And, many, if everyone is going in for their national service, many keep guns, many hunt, many live in areas where they hunt.
Nothing. I have no idea about the rest of the world, but I don't think it's anything like here. And the types of weapons and the access and the inspiration and the culture around them. And more importantly, even in those other countries, I mean, even Afghanistan, you don't see like people walking into their schools and the grocery stores and just shooting. It's just so much easier. And this is the type of violence we see all the time in America. And this is the type of violence I think that you're analyzing that we're going to probably sadly see more of, because it's one thing to join a group. It's another thing to, take the pledge and say you're going to be violent. And it's another thing to have access to weapons.
Yeah. And, the challenge is, even in other places, we've already seen a trend towards like individual, lone actor or small group attacks where someone can say that they're inspired by ISIS or they're following it, but it's an individual who's been mobilized. And of course, we see that a lot here. We just don't call it terrorism because they're not like pledging oaths to a group, before they commit it. But that is part of the concern about this, quote unquote salad bar ideologies, because, if someone can kill 6 women because he thinks he's having a bad day, Well, I mean, in France, if you did that, that would definitely be a terrorist
That
attack
was
if you're the wrong color. Right?
That was probably both racist and sexual, though. Like, you know, that's another like stupid having a bad day. Like that's a real that I think makes us mistake the real problem there with what that guy.
I mean, but the challenge is that you end up having incels that then, you know, and different countries are looking at them slightly differently. But at what point does it flip over into violent extremism or terrorism when it starts to organize and create, you know, that kind of outcome?
So we've been talking the entire time about identifying, I think what I would call is identifying the problems. And so I want to try to get to some solutions if we have a few minutes here at the end, what you think. And it seems like there are kind of two camps, and I'm sorry to create the binary, but there's in your world of counterterrorism and experts, that there's, you know, we need new laws for domestic terrorism, or as Patrick Skinner from your organization said, he's a police officer now, former CIA, we need to enforce the laws that we already have. I feel like from what I've heard from you, you fall more into the camp of we need new laws to create to designate domestic terrorists, but don't let me put you into a camp you're not in. I would like to retract that entire sentence. A thought, an ideology that you're not in.
No, I
not putting
think
anybody in camp.
I think that there are good arguments on both sides about whether we need a domestic terrorism statute or not. But there are a couple of real concrete challenges. As you said, I've worked a lot in the international space, right? And we're very comfortable identifying international terrorist groups and asking countries to take action against them, right? What happens now when they want us to take action against ours and we can't reciprocate? That's a really important dimension. Certainly, the UK right now has designated Atomwaffen Division on their domestic terrorism list. It's extraordinary. It's the first time it's a U.S. originated group that the UK has had to ban.
Atomwaffen is a Nazi-related term. I feel I forget what that is in reference to. It's like a neo-Nazi
group. I mean, they say they're disbanded and they have a new name, like National Order or something.
Well, that's another danger, right? When they rebrand themselves and they're wearing khakis and shirts instead of Klan hoods, or they're not calling themselves Atomwaffen.
They have nice new haircuts and
and they're handsome.
Exactly.
Every once in a while, there's a good-looking one.
They've appropriated a frog. I mean, what is that? But that could be a whole other podcast about appropriating frogs.
Oh, well, fine. Yeah.
As long as they leave Miss Piggy alone, that's fine.
Oh, God, don't even speak it.
Seriously. But I think that that's an important dimension, because the groups aren't just domestic anymore. They have international presence. They have international components. They are acting with international actors. So how do we close that gap between saying the domestic element is not a terrorist, but if they were international, they would be a terrorist? But they're posing threats not just to the U.S., to other countries. The other challenge we have is that we can't track their financing the same way through terrorism financing mechanisms, right? So
can you give me an example of like how that would be a problem for an American, who is financing some operation or organization and we can't track it?
Right. So you could send money to any one of the, neo-Nazi websites or Rise Above movement or somebody, you can send money, you can pay membership dues, you can buy paraphernalia, you can buy a cool jacket. I mean, an uncool jacket, obviously, but, you can buy fashion, you can buy merchandise, and it's perfectly fine. That's how they're raising money through membership dues, through paraphernalia, through hosting events. None of these things are illegal. Now, can you imagine alqaeda.com where you can buy some cool paraphernalia and go to a concert?
Well, you're actually making me think of something that's far more obvious and transparent, which is right now, like I support this podcast through subscribers. They pay me for the podcast, but I could then go and pay some guy who's constantly every day spouting Nazi rhetoric on Patreon or Substack. And they are out there. And what Absolutely. Do you, that's a really good point about how they get funded. They're just like me, sitting in their shed, doing their thing, but I'm not spouting and promoting violence, obviously. But there are so many that are.
Exactly. And so that's where I think, the domestic terrorism statute would be important, because we need a slightly more even playing field between how we deal with terrorism at home and terrorism abroad. And they aren't different things. If you're committing terrorism and you're inciting terrorism and you're financing terrorism, it should be terrorism.
All my friends on the left are terrified of that idea because they think that the FBI especially is always going to come after the Black Lives Matter, the leftists, the anti-fascists first.
I was going to add the all-important caveat that domestically we have to find a way to have independent oversight and checks and balances on the application of the law. Now, it's not a blank slate. The UK, for example, has an independent reviewer of terrorism legislation. They have an independent reviewer of their prevention programs. I mean, I refuse to believe that in this country we can't find a creative way to ensure there's some independent oversight and checks and balances, but also a robust response. And, we shouldn't be privileging domestic violent extremists over international terrorists if they're all aimed at committing harm.
Is there any other law or policy or idea that you think is would be very effective if we could somehow implement it? I mean, I just always come back to gun laws because if we're trying to prevent violence, then I feel like, access to weapons is one answer. But I'm not sure exactly what the goal is. Stopping the spread of the ideology, I would think what most counter-terrorist experts want to start with, but I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Well, one of the interesting things we've seen from the last 2 decades of trying to counter terrorist narratives is it doesn't just work if you come in and say your narrative is wrong. What works is to have an effective counter narrative. And I don't mean like an artificially produced counter narrative. I mean genuinely, show, like, muddy the space. Don't just have black and white, increase the gray zone, right? So and we talk about this in the report a little bit in our QAnon report about, not only making sure you have the deplatforming and social media algorithms managing how narratives spread, but you have like media literacy classes, you have, positive real action that you can take. So police reform to address concerns about police brutality, not just conversations about police brutality, right? Looking at addressing what we've talked about is, the main crisis that gives rise to this, the pandemic, effective action to, address the pandemic. So I think that that's a really important element that we should work into all policy responses is have effective counter narratives, but through action, not just rhetoric. Yeah,
I feel like when we talk about the foreigners and foreign countries and we think about, places where extremism lives and in America where there is violence and extremism, it so often has to do with a lack of opportunity, a lack of a place to be. Like when I was young, I got arrested, Naureen. Everybody who listens to the show knows this, but I think about it all the time. We got arrested for playing mailbox baseball. You know what that is?
No.
Like if you live in the country, you know what it is. You're driving around with a baseball bat and you drive up and knock people's mailboxes off their mailbox post. Yeah. Okay. It's vandalism and it's very personal vandalism. It's pretty horrible. The reason we did that was because we had an hour and a half after school and before our lacrosse practice. We didn't have anything to do. We didn't have anywhere to be. We got in trouble. I have heard from sociologists and crime prevention experts that so much of it is about giving people an opportunity so that they don't have a grievance, so that they don't have a space to want to commit a crime, so that they aren't pissed off all of the time. And I feel like some of the solutions that government needs to offer would actually go to solve the problems that you're looking at all the time.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the things you're absolutely right in many ways, but also terrorist groups or, these big groups aren't monolithic. You have hardened ideologues who really believe in the idea of, whether it's jihad or replacement theory, whatever your ideology is, they're the hardcore ideologues. You have hardcore tacticians, battle hardened, operatives, but you do have people who join then for money, for boredom, for adventure. So we have to remember that there's like a variety of reasons people join. So if you're a hardened ideologue, then having a good after-school program is not going to be the answer, right? But if you're bored and you're looking to hang out with the cool kids, then maybe finding a really cool after-school program is the answer. And I think that's one of the things we're seeing. Like, we need to target all elements. you need to make sure that, like, I mean, for so long, all these counterterrorism programs were dealing with young men, and then a bunch of girls went to join ISIS, and people were like, oh my gosh, we forgot that girls get pissed off, girls have agency, and girls can do stuff too. And, certainly in Europe, we've seen a number of terrorist attacks perpetrated by women. So again, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit we could do in the prevention space, but we also have to remember there's like a wide range of people that join the groups, and they require different we need all sorts of different programs all at the same time.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, thank you very much for joining me. I'll tell you, in preparation to talking to you and in our discussion today, I think the thing that I enjoyed most about your analysis is how nuanced it is, and how when, someone throws out a point or a question, it's, you take a step back and say, well, it's a lot more than that. It's not the role of women, it's the roles of women, and yes, things like that. I think is really important analysis, and it's great to get you on this show for the first time. And I do feel a little better knowing that someone like you is working in an organization like the Soufan Group and helping us get educated and understand these issues so that we can do whatever we need to do to prevent this type of violence and extremism in our country, because it's super scary. But good to know that you're on the job, Naureen. Thank you. I'm trying my best. Thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. All right, there you go, Naureen Fink. She's on Twitter at Naureen C. Fink, the executive director of the Soufan Center. If you copy at the Soufan Center and at Naureen C. Fink, then they will definitely see your tweet, and it'll be great because they have a whole bunch of experts. I mean, it's not hard for me to get them on because I know Ali so well. He's a very close personal friend of mine, of course. But I love having them on, and I want them to think it's worth their while, as it always is, to join me here on Stand Up. And I can't do it without you and your support. Thank you so much to those of you who are subscribers to this show. And if you aren't, please join up, sign up, be a part of our community. Hang out with us on Thursday nights at 8 p.m. or anytime on the Discord platform. Or just support independent media. I'm happy to have it. I certainly need it. Getting closer and closer to being able to hire somebody to join me, to help me a few hours a week on the podcast, make it bigger and better, and grow this program and the community along with it, so we can learn together each and every day here on Stand Up with Pete Dominic Daily. That's all I've got for you. So let me hand you off to Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter, founding member of Starland Vocal Band, online at johncarroll.org, the great and talented and good friend, John Carroll. Take it away with Stand Up.
Stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.